It's time to introduce our fabulous speaker, Mary Jennings. Mary is local to the Washington, D.C. area. She's a graduate of the Duke Ellington School of the Arts and Moore College of Art and Design in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Currently, Mary operates her art business, where she serves as a professional artist and art instructor in settings like Workhouse for the Arts, Arlington Artists Alliance, National Sporting Library and Museum, the Salamander Resort and Spa, and other workshops. Mary earned her certification as an Extension Master Gardener in 2013, her Master Naturalist in 2022, and Level 1 Sommelier in 2023. Mary has taught Garden Journal for the Master Gardeners in 2024, Nature Journaling at the Workhouse, and Sunday Sketch with National Sporting Library Museum, and how to use the journal to plan your garden with the Blue Ridge Flower and Garden Club. Certainly a wonderful presenter that we're looking forward to learning from today. So with that, Mary, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ben, and I appreciate the wonderful introduction. And thank you, Master Gardeners, for inviting me to talk on a topic that I love. A combination, of course, one being art and the other being master gardening. The reason why I went into the Master Gardener training is because I have this amazing art gallery of some invasives. I've actually taken time to study them, paint them, and even frame them, and some just obnoxious nuisance plants. Why I also love botanical journaling is because it gives me an opportunity to create and enjoy the wonderful aspects of being in nature, but it also helps me learn what I shouldn't plant or what I shouldn't keep. So, today's agenda, we will be working through a couple things. We'll cover three main sections in this presentation. First, I will introduce the concept of botanical journaling and discuss its history and purpose. Next, I will work into the techniques, the artistic techniques involved in botanical journaling, and some of what I've used specifically. And then finally, we will highlight some of the benefits of botanical journaling, focusing on how it enhances observation skills and fosters a deeper connection with nature. But more specifically, how it leads to plant identification. I will also be dipping into some of the wonderful resources that I've come across in my journey through botanical journaling. So I am more of an artist in general and an instructor. I'm not specifically a botanical journal specialist. So I will be sort of showing you almost a peer's guide. I think one of our people in the chat box did say we're all artists, and I 100% agree. We all are artists. So I'm hoping to bring together an approachable method of bringing art and science together in this expressive way. And also processes of recording observations. Through doing research and becoming more passionate about this, I've uncovered some amazing work. Even though it is art, it is a method of botany. So, what is botany? It's the study of patterns in plants. And as a textile design major and a print design artist in my early years, I adore looking for the patterns, and I'm just blown away by the beautiful botany that we have around us all the time. So, in learning to document these, there is a process of doing it throughout the year, which I have pictured in the lower left-hand corner of this slide. This is a way you can lay out your journal page by page in a format that will allow you to have a perpetual journal. And that is something that you can approach year after year in the same week. What do I see? What do I observe? What can I document within the same week? So that lower left-hand side is sort of ways that you can open your journal or your spiral sketchbook or whatever you're using at the time, and you can actually mark out each week, March 15th through the 21st, March 22nd through the 28th, March 29th through the 31st. Next page, April 1st through the 7th. And you can begin your empty book with just that first process, which allows you to then begin documenting what you see throughout the year, which is fantastic. So there is a direct power to botanical journaling. And what is that? You are able to experience botany in a very unique way. There's the advantage of the visual and written record of plants that you can provide, and you are not just making art, but you're writing, which is more art. You are actually able to study the plants and the relationships in a way that you're able to focus and drill down into this process. This is something that is recorded as part of the process of botany. Amy Tan, who wrote a book that was released in 2024 on the backyard bird, she wrote a book about her process of documenting, and that it was a specific process where you paid attention and you did it, and it was an act of love through this observation. So that is absolutely true. And then the other part of that is you are getting the science aspect of it where you're able to identify the plants. And another author, Celeste Handley, her book, Do Nothing, is specifically designed, obviously, to instruct us to do less. But in that process, you are doing less, and perhaps you're being one with nature, so to speak, and you're able to sort of be still and document some of these wonderful things that you're coming across within nature. The advantage, of course, to learning what you're sort of surrounded by is, in Celeste's words, you're able to become more empathetic to your surroundings and understand your surroundings and navigate your surroundings and be able to understand why this plant is in this part of California, or why this plant is in this part of Florida, and why this plant is in part of Maine. So it's almost like the plants are street signs to help us navigate our way and also give us a sense of place. So there's that comes through the study, and you begin to understand what the plants are doing throughout the seasons. So that is extremely powerful, because if you've ever been in a city that you are not familiar with, not knowing where you are is very disorienting. Much like people who don't take the time to understand the nature around them, it can be very disorienting, or it can actually just lead to just being apathetic to it instead of empathetic. It also helps nurture an appreciation that helps potentially save the environment. So we have the history and the purpose of nature journaling. Honestly, there's a long history of botanical journaling, or how to document journaling. Obviously, it's not just with the first little pretty illustration that maybe Audubon created. I kind of went back in the archives, and our interest in nature and around us, obviously, I think originated specifically with agriculture being more of a importance because people have to eat. So this is a capture of ripe barley that's currently at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. This is obviously not just to make a visual pretty thing, it's actually to educate others, and especially without words, before literacy was something that was widely accessible. So in current times, we use botanical journaling to educate others and educate ourselves. We'll talk more about how to lay out what you're drawing to help with that process. The other advantage to actually learning the process throughout the year is you are able to document the life cycle of something, which is helpful to any great number of people, from the person that has a lawn or the person that is actually trying to catch a fish. I taught a Sunday sketch program, which I believe I've actually given the link to in your handouts, and it was for the National Sporting Library and Museum for their fly fishing lure collection that they have. The knowledge of the life cycle of the fly, or the insects that would become food for the fish, was important. And then the fly fishermen would then craft the lure to mimic the insect's life cycle, particularly at the time when the fishermen wanted to lure the fish. So they would create their lure based on their notes and understanding of when the bug's life cycle would occur at a specific time, and they were able to make that a success. So there is advantages. It doesn't specifically have to do with specifically plants. Here we go. There is so much you can do with botanical journaling, as I mentioned before. With Earth Day coming up, you can do it your way. You can actually start this from today's lesson. You can maybe get excited about establishing a journal yourself, and you can begin to document certain things. Now, the important part of any journal is to ask questions, and that comes specifically from, well, I would say John Muir Laws has so many videos on YouTube, and he has wonderful books, which I've actually mentioned in my reference or my resource page on the process of nature journaling. And he recommends you ask questions. And I'm going to restate that many, many times because honestly, I believe that we should keep it simple and we should stay curious. And of course, we should get outside. So, those are basically my foundational reasons behind nature journaling. So, in this case, what I have pictured, the same question that the Master Gardeners posted on March 15th through their social media outlet. What is that purple plant in my yard? Well, that's a great question. So I ran out my front door and I grabbed some wonderful purple plants that were in my front yard, and I began to investigate their uniqueness and their differences, and of course, their advantages and their disadvantages. This is a great way to start your botanical journal process. It doesn't have to be complicated. Keep it very simple. And so this is a photograph in the upper right-hand corner of the slide of my haul. You might be asking yourself, well, why do I need to draw anything? Why can't I just take a photo? Yes, that's of course an option, but I will tell you that the unique process of actually documenting this kind of capture in nature and in time, and the process of sitting within your own space and focusing on this is not to be replaced. It metabolizes the learning and it makes it stick. When you just pluck some things out of your yard and you just take a picture of them, you're almost getting a two-dimensional opportunity that will also be stuck in your camera unless you download it or print it out, and you probably won't visit it again. So really documenting what you see, it's such a much richer process than just taking a photo. So let's test some of your drawing skills now. I know you're going to be a little bit nervous about this, but I would recommend if you have the opportunity to grab a piece of paper, grab a pen or pencil, or even your finger on the surface of your table is just fine. It's the act of actually using your hand that helps you learn this process and to make it stick. So with your finger or with a pen, draw a square. With your finger or a pen, draw a Y. And then if you know what a peace sign looks like, draw a peace sign. And with those simple things, or even draw a T, the letter T, a lowercase t, and then draw K. Okay. You've almost started a botanical journal just in those simple drawings. So keep it simple, and you will begin to notice these kind of drawn patterns throughout your plant process. So this is basically the introduction. I am happy to begin answering questions.
Actually, there are no questions in the chat at the moment besides asking you to re-identify the two books that you mentioned earlier.
There are two that are specifically mentioned also in the resources that you get in your email. So those will be documented. The plant identification one, Celeste Headley's, Headlee, Do Nothing. And that's a fun book to read. And honestly, in this frantic, crazy world, it's an older book. I'm not exactly positive when it came out. It's at least 10 years old. And it's a great book to sort of remind us to slow down. Another good book that I've read recently is called Slow Productivity. And that doesn't have anything to do with botanical journaling or anything, but it actually invites us to sit and do almost nothing and be sort of surrounded by nature to do things at a more reasonable pace so that we can actually be more productive in our other lives. And I would say that's a definite benefit to botanical journaling. I would also say that in my experience, it's something that rolls into other things. Your curiosity, when you open the floodgates of your curiosity, it is just beneficial on so many levels. But with respect to developing an understanding of your surroundings and even your own personal surroundings or your own personal impression of the surroundings is so beneficial. Before we go into the next phase, I will show you these two wonderful field versions of watercolor sets. This one has just the tiniest palette, and this little white area is the area I mix colors. And this is a watercolor I did of it was in Hawaii, but it's a mountain plum. And I did this on location. So this was something I did sitting under the plum tree. So the advantage to using small, and there's other watercolors and such, but the advantage to having something small is huge because you can then use it on the go and you can take it wherever you go. And this is a little case which will house some of the things. So I have colored pencils, I have regular pencils, and it's a little case that will hold everything. It's just the tiniest little thing, so I can go out in the field and I can actually make the art. So I used this when I taught a corporate group botanical journaling and being able to encourage them to be on the go with it. All right. So before we get into all the wonderful fun of making an artwork from your botanical journaling, I wanted to first of all highlight Annie Alber's work. She is a weaver. And while she's using threads that are woven over and under to create a weaving, she's also known for some of her earlier works, which are drawings and prints of basic woven threads. And she's able to document the actual over and under, which makes it, even though this looks like a jumbled mess, it is a weaving of a sort, and you can actually trace your fingers along and you can say, oh, I can see where this got locked, this thread was locked down. It's not just this loose mass of things. When I worked for the Cooper Hewitt Museum when I was in college, I worked in their textile department, and I would go into their collection and I would have to look in a microscope and I would have to document particular fabrics, and I would have to document their weaving, and I would have to say, okay, this thread goes over and under two threads and then over three threads, and I would have to draw that. So I would say that was my first introduction to creating a drawing that actually had some scientific use. And these don't have to be boring. These don't have to be overly void of personality. You can see in this illustration by Annie Albers that she has been able to just capture it in a beautiful way and show the positive and negative space. And I just wanted to share that with you as an option for the beauty that these things can be when you go into detailing the patterns and the particular qualities of a plant. You're going to have to make sure that you show, yes, this leaf goes over this, or this part of this flower goes under here. And so you'll have to be very, very specific with your drawing so that you can absolutely understand how to identify these things later on. So there's actually a process. The reason why you want to be specific is because it can lead to things, not just for your own personal enjoyment, but you might actually be finding something that hasn't been discovered. It's highly doubtful, but just the excitement of that is okay. So you're contributing to citizen science in a very wonderful way, especially with your perpetual journal. If you decide that you want to actually document your botanical drawings in that method. So the process of journaling is going to take practice, and you will become better at documenting exactly what you want to document over process. A child doesn't start running, they start by walking. So in the lower right-hand corner, you will see that sometimes the drawing doesn't really depict exactly what is seen. And in the upper drawing, that's very lovely, but I don't think it even needs to be that detailed or that beautiful. That's the next level. This is a very extensive process of drawing. So it can be somewhere in between or both or all of the above. You are documenting something, you're curious, you've asked your questions, and you've decided that you want to document these in a way. And honestly, sometimes you're out in the field, you do not have time to go into great detail. There are two parts to Botanical Journey. One is botanical notes, which are basically field notes, and you're making questions and you're making notes on these things. And then you will actually then be able to, maybe when you come inside, if the weather's bad outside, you'll come inside, you'll be able to drill down and go into deeper study of these things through using your books, through using other mediums and that sort of thing. Remembering that this is about journaling and exploration and curiosity. It's not necessarily about making a work of art. And understanding proportions, you can highlight certain portions of your drawing to then go deeper into the exploration. But it also might help. Honestly, I know this is an important tool, but to have a scale reference somehow in your drawing. This is something I actually don't practice enough. But I know when you're taking a photograph of something and you're posting it on a wonderful website such as Capital Naturalist, Alonso Abagadas has a fantastic site. Having a picture of a coin or a pencil top or your finger or something like that to somehow denote the scale of what you're looking at is wonderful. It doesn't hurt to have a little ruler, maybe even, because scale does matter. Okay, I don't know if you've noticed at the bottom, I have said prepare to gasp. So I'm going to show you some art from a fantastic, well-known artist who will blow your mind, whether she's doing a little doodle or an actual work of art. So some of you may already know about Laura Call Gassinger. So her work is fantastic, as you can see. She is a botanist. She was the chief illustrator for the Flora in Virginia, massive book documenting all of the flora in Virginia, among other illustrators in that massive reference. But she is the one I can absolutely credit to the perpetual journal process. She's the creator of that, and her Instagram account is listed on my reference sheet. These are photographs from her website. As you can see, she has the command of her mediums and her drawing ability, but she also has the ability to have fun. And in this illustration of a leaf, she's taken time to do some of the description of the leaf, sort of in a very artistic way around the leaf. In the illustration on the far right, upper right, she's done color, an indication of a range of colors that she found. So she's made a reference to her color use. And you can also see that she has been able to highlight some of the positive and negative by giving background color, not necessarily something you would find in nature, but something that's helping her botanical illustration come to life. These are illustrations from her perpetual journal. So she's taken time to overlap illustrations. She's taken time to allow space for future years. She's also made time to capture the date, maybe some information about the conditions, either the weather conditions or something scientific that would help. In the lower right-hand illustration, she's also taken parts of the fruit and she has done specific illustrations with regard to that. Her work is phenomenal. She's such an inspiration to me, and she's lovely, super, super lovely too. And she's got probably some videos online that you can look at and just be in awe of later. So I presented her work first because that was important to see how she used color. but I'm going to actually pose the question, is color an essential part of botanical journaling? Yes, but maybe no. As you saw, her illustrations did, in some cases, go all in on color. And in some cases, she used it as a part to show positive and negative shapes, or maybe a specific color palette that was unique. So the answer is yes and no. You can also be inspired by color. And then you can also be looking at something and going, there's no possible way I'm capable of mixing that color in order to capture it perfectly. So use your words, descriptive terms. This color is like something, something, something. So you can absolutely use language to help you describe a color. Now, the photographs that I've shown here are fun. Photos do help you capture plants in a way that you might not be able to capture them on your journal in person. So photos do help, and this is showing a wide range of the same plant in different times, different seasons. So the upper right is the bright green of what you might find sometime around this time, actually. The hydrangeas would just begin to bring in their buds, and their buds are setting, and look how small it is. So my finger is there for scale. And then in the beautiful understory perspective that I could catch with my camera, but maybe I couldn't catch with my eyeballs necessarily. And obviously with the blue in the background, these are wonderful. And then you can also have fun capturing perhaps the expired blossoms on a light box to see their vein work and maybe even some artistic versions of how the colors overlay. You can either choose to be inspired or overwhelmed by color, but practice is the answer. And then when in doubt, you can always use your words. Use your words. So, getting started, I also use this photograph because this is a student's work when I was teaching at the workhouse. And I took the students out to go grab samples. So we took some samples from the workhouse, which I don't know if you know the history of the workhouse. Center for the Arts in Virginia was formerly a prison, the Lorton prison. It doesn't have the richest and most diverse plant life. So we walked around the yard, so to speak, and we pulled a lot of things. And we are journaling these. We are documenting what we found. We are not doing the ideal setting for the world's greatest garden. You'll see some interesting plants. If you, some of them you might recognize. This is a honeysuckle, an armor honeysuckle. But getting started, you can do it in a couple different ways. You can also just do a color study to get started. So in this case, I had the student take each plant, and you can see there was one that was predominantly red, and I had her do simply a color study of what she found. So this is a fantastic way to practice your color. And of course, you're still honing your observation skills and your art skills at the same time. And I recommend going out your front door. You can do this. You can go into a park and do this to get a variety of plants. You can also, without taking samples, you can go into a garden center and you can begin some of your botanical journaling in the garden center. I think that would be fantastic. Wouldn't it be wonderful to take some time for plants that you may not have access to right away and get a chance to do those and to learn more about that? So, with that, we have an opportunity to answer questions.
Thanks, Mary. We do have a couple of questions. Amy was hoping you can remind us where to search for that zippered pouch that you had shown on camera a little bit earlier. Do you have any more clues to help people find something like that?
Sure. So I have a couple version of this. This is primarily if you look up, this is actually a data. It's designed to hold your cords for um, you know, your plugs, all your little technical
Yeah.
devices, your technology. Boy, I'm really struggling with words, but your technology, and I just converted it to be a wonderful to-go thing. And as a matter of fact, I have it in the king size version. I've got it in the super double pouch because you'll figure out that, oh, I need everything. So this is one that actually has two pouches, and This is my new kind of almost favorite thing because it actually comes with it's almost like a little carry pouch, this particular brand. And it also comes with something that can connect to your belt hoop. It also comes with all the things you need, the journal, this wonderful little journal, this particular larger palette than I would even have normally. And it comes complete with that. This watercolor paper is pretty wonderful. It doesn't have enough to do a whole year of botanical journaling, but you can find more of these. I'm a big fan of little books that I can finish in a time frame. So I took this, obviously little guy, with me to a trip to Hawaii, and I was able to capture, well, I was even inside a little nightclub and did a little nightclub thing. This is an entire mountain.
Wow.
Um, Now, I will say this is kind of neat because I'll show people this sometimes and they'll say, wow, those are really straight edges. How did you do that? And I'm like, that's not the important part. But of course, they want to know. So I used washi tape.
Okay.
If you
Sure.
want straight edges on your botanical journal, if you're one of those people, this is washi tape. I would recommend you get a white. You can also get artist tape, but this is nice because it's a little guy. It's able to create clean edges. It will not tear the paper, and you can remove it once you're finished. And it is very satisfying to have such nice clean edges. But if you have something that has like a print, like a lot of washi tapes do, that ink might come off on your paper and then you'll be sad. What I usually do with a pack, whenever I get any sort of color palette, is I make a color key so I could see how this paint handled on paper. And what I'll do with that is I will do a darker area and I'll work it into the light area. I have a link to a demonstration video on your resource page that will show you how you do that with a variety of mediums.
And Anne was hoping you could also share the brand of the tiny watercolor palettes and the pages. Do you know what those may be, or should folks just Google?
I think you're going to have to look. I don't have the brand of this. So this comes without the watercolor in the pockets.
Yep.
And then I loaded a very limited palette. One thing I failed to mention is the tool that I use to paint all the tiny things is basically one of these wonderful watercolor brush in a pen form. So
Mm,
this chamber has water in it. So you've got your watercolor and a nice tiny brush.
wow.
The other fun thing is that you might be like, well, oh, I don't have a napkin. Let me tell you, pro tip. I use this as my napkin. So this is one of those tennis sweatbands. So I use this to actually clean my brush because in
Oh, okay.
watercolor, a clean brush is a big deal. And I typically don't do a lot of pencil drawing with my watercolors because I don't want to erase the pencil marking. So if I do, I use a very light, super tiny mechanical pencil to lightly sketch. And if I wanted to do outlining, I use the Micron. I do have a link to all of these supplies in the resource section. So that you will have links to. I think I also in the resource section have my email. So if you have any further questions, don't hesitate to reach out.
Eve had an additional question. She is
Sure.
wondering if it is also potentially a good idea to take a photo of the subject that you're sketching so that if you're finishing the drawing later, maybe you can continue that sort of touch up through the photo.
Absolutely. I'll use the photo that's actually here right now on the question slide as the reasons why that is great, but that also does not replace the actual ability to study the plant. You will be surprised when you get back to your little studio. You look at the picture and you're like, oh, I wish this had the connecting to the stem or the branch. I wish, I wish, I wish. And because you have questions and you can't answer them to the photograph. So honestly, really take a very dedicated time, if you can, to study the plant. Or you might also be practiced enough to where you can know exactly what you're going to want to see later. You'll see the root structure in this photograph. That's a piece of information that will help you identify the plant. You'll see the underside of where the leaves connect to the stem, but you'll see some of it's very fuzzy and some of it's very clear, that will get on your nerves because you'll be like, oh, I wish. So, yes, perfectly acceptable, but then yet not adequate. So, don't count on your photographs. Obviously, you're on a hike. You're not going to be able to whip all this out and do. But in some cases, I would say practice a lot of that so that you can understand what you're going to want later. So you can take an informed photograph versus just a snap.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense.
Definitely. And you followed up to note that sometimes she zooms in on the photos to see some of those finer details. I'll say that I do that a lot with my orchid collection when I'm trying to understand what are these pests? My old eyes, I need the zoom to go in. We had one other question for you, Mary, before we keep going. Amy was wondering if you had any recommendations for light boxes. She really liked the study that you showed.
Well, I have an old fashioned light box and it's called a window. In some cases, you can maybe wet the leaf and put it on your window with the sun shining through it, and you will be able to use that as a light box. Honestly, they come in all shapes and sizes. I have an old one from like when I was in college. It's a big one. Don't have any specific. You don't need a light box in your collection of goodies. You could do old fashioned things. Even a piece of tracing paper on a window will give you the whiteness of what you're looking if you don't want to have the green of what's behind it. But yeah, old school things. Or you can use a piece of glass with a light behind it. And I'm all about, old school.
The old ways still work.
They do. They do. Thanks, Ben. So now we're into the plant identification portion. This is where it really gets fun. I mean, the art is definitely fun, but this is where it's so exciting because you're like, you play a little investigative puzzle solver or problem solver. This is an illustration in this photo that I started earlier this week. I happened to be in the northern part of Florida near Amelia Island. Actually, it was on Amelia Island. So Amelia Island is just beneath Georgia, the Georgia line, and it's a combination of the coast and some very immense wetlands. So it's this wonderful sort of position for different plant life. So the live oaks caught my attention. I began to really just sort of look because I'd never been to this area before. So I began to look at the trees and the southern moss hanging off of the trees. And so when I set off to make my botanical journal, I started off with a question. And I would say that is some of the most fun way to start a journal is with a question. So big Q, the beginning, because I saw some trees that had these different leaf margins than other trees. And I was like, is this the same tree? Is this a different type of live oak? It looks like a live oak, but is it a live oak? So I set off to work, and I'm just there for a couple of days. The illustration on the right is actually captured from a photograph. So, Eve, that is exactly how I was able to capture through a couple of different photographs this. And I was particularly interested in the leaf margins and how the leaves were arranged and how they terminated, how the branch terminated, and some of the colors. Obviously, this is all black and white, but I did do some descriptions of the color. Because we were staying at a house, I was able to find some of the fruit from the previous fall, which was an acorn. I didn't get the cap of the acorn, but I was able to illustrate the size of the acorn and the coloring. And I was able to focus on the detail. And you'll see in this drawing, I've sort of sectioned off certain parts of the journal to help support my question and answer session. You can dissect your page in ways that help support your question and answer portion. I was able to find leaves from the previous fall, and I was able to look at them and how they browned, and also the different size that they took, the different sizes of the leaves. And you can just sort of break your journal page up in various things. And then I also have the immense amount of catkins that were all over the ground to look at, but obviously I didn't see them when they were still attached to the tree. They were just in their sort of expired state, but that still makes for great journaling, anything. And it just made the trip actually. We went to some lovely restaurants, but honestly, it was all about the journal. I had just a fantastic time. So I can only recommend bringing your journal with you on trips. It doesn't just have to be for your own yard and purpose. All right. So we have something that I wish I had on my trip, and that was this magnifying glass, a little portable magnifying glass that I highly recommend you getting and adding to your little case for botanical journaling. It doesn't take much, but I certainly wish I had this in my possession during my little exploration process. Once you get into the details of looking at particular parts of the plant, you will want to know certain sort of terms or what you're looking for. You'd be like, well, that's a leaf. Ah, is it? It's more than just a leaf. It has leaf margins. There's access to this kind of wonderful detail. And this is a page from this particular book that I have access to. But you can also download some of this information onto your phone so you can have immediate access to it to help you make identification. There are also other tools that you can use. But honestly, you're drawing and capturing. You can wait to determine what those notes mean later. But one of the biggest tools I would have appreciated having to see the details would have been the magnifying glass. So when you get back home, you get the advantage of doing some studying on the internet, or you can go to your master gardener with a sample, or when you are diagramming these parts, you can make observations. But one thing I want you to ask yourself is, a leaf enough? Are two leaves enough? Are two leaves attached to the basic end of the branch enough? Is a part of the cat skin enough to identify? And I would say, no, not really. For proper identification, honestly, especially if you're bringing something in for identification, it is important to note even the connection to the trunk of the tree, if it's a tree, the branches, the leaves, the flowers, the seed pods, which would have been the acorn and the fruit. So all those things matter when you are identifying a plant accurately, because there are some very subtle differences sometimes between what you're looking at. So make sure when you are journaling, and this is by choice, but if you're looking specifically with relation to plant identification, you will want to have enough of the plant to be able to actually make a qualified identification of the plant. And knowing some of the terms is super helpful in this process as well. Speaking of terms, having access to specific terms can be very simple to start out with, such as dicot and monocot. And those aren't the only two, those are the most common in the ways to identify. And then kind of knowing some characteristics of what a dicot and a monocot have unique to them. So a dicot, two seed leaves, monocot, one seed leaf. Dicots have netted veins in the leaves. Dicot usually are taprooted. So knowing a little bit about the taproot system, as I did in that one particular sample, is important. Obviously, you can't go digging up everything. So just that's interesting to know in some cases. It's also usually complex branches, which is a term that you need to know. And the floral parts mostly are in fours and fives. Whereas monocots, obviously one seed leaf, parallel veins, parallel veins versus netted veins, and the horizontal root sticks, and then usually simple branching, and the floral parts are mostly in threes. Having these documented properly will help you identify the plant. And obviously, just looking and making observations, you can always identify the parts after you've done the drawing. Like in the illustration in the upper left-hand corner, I did not do those on site. I actually did the drawing, and then I was able to identify parts of the plant later and make those observations. So you will have questions, and you will also want to mark those in your journal, because it would be handy to actually refer to the answer that you might obtain through your study. Some tools on the internet are helpful and some of them are just really wrong. But I will direct you to whatever your question is, like what is the tree most common in Florida, if I wanted to ask that. Then I would put site edu to see if I could get maybe the Florida State Extension literature on trees that are native in Florida, most common in the case of the live oak when I was making my study earlier this week. And our wonderful host, Ben, also made the comment when we were talking earlier that in some cases there isn't exact information from some of these resources with regard to, say, orchids. So he actually was able to get success from site::org. And iNaturalist is a very lovely, you can get it on your phone by taking a photograph and it'll give you recommendations. In every case, I will say trust and verify. Trust and verify. So I would say it's part of the fun and it's part of the puzzle to not just be like done with it. I would say it's always sort of an evolving experience in what you're looking at. And you're also going to want to have questions that constantly come up, like how tall is the plant? Where is the plant growing? Some of the site characteristics, as I mentioned in Florida, there was the wetland and then there was the coastal area. And I don't know if you could identify what my question I asked was, are these the same tree? One was a little further in the middle of the two wetland and coastal parts, and I didn't see any sort of margin differentiations on the leaves. Well, that I've learned through further study could actually be more of a teenage leaf. That could be actually something that is more of a immature leaf shape with the margins that have tooth to it rather than a whole different species of tree. So lots of questions and lots of answers that you can get through. So the other thing I love is the patterns. As I mentioned earlier, it's just my sort of inclination to being a person that loves print design and repeats and patterns, and nature blows everything I could ever make with my hands away 100%. So referring back to things that I found in my lawn because of my knowledge of looking for certain patterns. I don't know if you recall, I looked at the stem, and two of actually what I plucked had square stems. So two of the plants that I picked in my yard, I had violet, I had some other things. One was a purple dead nettle, and one was a henbit. And because of some references that I have, and one of them being as cited here, Botany in a Day, fantastic book. I have it right here. Super fun. And I also have the card game because I love teaching. So I have the little card game. And the cards in this slide, the top image is basically of what you see in the card. So it's a way to play and learn. I think there was a collection of about 8 or 12 plant families in that particular card deck where you can learn. Now, the mint family, I'm citing this because that's two of the plants plucked out of my yard were from the mint family because of the square stem and also because of the way the leaves were positioned opposite. Did it have a fragrance? You might be like, oh, but it doesn't have a fragrance. They didn't have a fragrance. They usually have a fragrance, but they also sometimes don't have a fragrance. And that's something when you start learning the patterns of the plant family, you begin to know these things. It's a huge family. You might not also know that this family, basil, rosemary, lavender, sage, these are also part of the edible mint family, oddly enough, and they are aromatic. I'm just giving you this picture so that you can see the different ways that these illustrations are made. You know, you don't have to document this in such detail when you're doing this. It can simply be showing opposite. And remember, I had you draw with your fingers. You can make it as rudimentary as, leaves opposite, they do not have to be utter works of art when you are drawing these wonderful things. The other advantage to looking at art and to plant identification is, as I mentioned, the advantage of right plant in the right place. And I also have a term that I like to use for wildlife management, pest management, plant management. Ask before you act. So again, the journaling process gives you an opportunity to actually ask these sort of questions before you do something that you can't undo. As I mentioned, I have documented some of the most obnoxious plants and actually framed them. Porcelain berry. I have an oil painting from way, way long ago of a porcelain berry. The leaves are just so beautiful. And then I have some other artwork that I keep because it reminds me to identify plants more accurately. So, a story time with Mary, I actually have an armor honeysuckle story, and that involves an encounter I had with my neighbor who had a massive honeysuckle. And while I liked it because it sort of kept me from viewing my neighbor often, I did take it upon myself to mention, hey, that is something that probably would benefit from being removed. And there is a process to removing them, which I will not cover. But these are terrible for the environment because of their chemical properties that don't allow anything to grow under. And anyway, he has since removed it. But before, as I was mentioning to him, I actually shared that his honeysuckle was propagating all over my property, in between plants, in the margins, near the sidewalks, all over, even the front yard, thanks to the birds and the wind and all those things. It was really becoming quite a nuisance. And I began to aggressively cut these things down and go at it. But I didn't, because I assumed I knew. But then I discovered there's actually a native that could have some of the same properties as perhaps a young honeysuckle. And I panicked. And then I went to one that I hadn't hacked, and I looked, and thankfully it had a hollow pith. So really take time to ask before you act, because you might either plant something that you really don't have full knowledge of, as I've done several times, their growing properties, or you actually cut something down that you didn't mean to. But unfortunately, they still make pretty art, as you can see with the little watercolor and things like that. So you could just have a good time documenting some of these horrible things before you get rid of them. Now, the other advantage as I wrap up is they're obvious. So I have taught nature journaling, botanical journaling, garden journaling. Really, it's just basically time in nature. But I've taught it to garden clubs. I've taught it to corporate groups because they are interested in the science, but also the art benefits of getting out. One group I taught last fall, they have an office building. They have a whole building in Crystal City, Virginia. And on one of their floors, they have a dedicated garden with, thankfully, quite a few native plants, which is very nice. So I took them up to their own rooftop garden, and I encouraged them to spend time in nature and to ask questions. The other part about nature journaling, which I will tell you is really wonderful, is you are not the expert going into the whole process. You're not the expert. So you get to ask yourself questions. You get to sit down for a minute. You get to make mistakes. You get to sort of observe and take time, and you get to play. And you also get to adore, because of the time and attention that you're taking to observe these things, you get to adore what you're looking at. And then through the future study and analyzation with some of the online tools that we have, you get to then get a further appreciation for maybe what its benefit is to the ecosystem and so on. So I encouraged my little corporate group to get all their senses involved: sight, sound, smell, all of those things. There is really basically no downside to this time. I will remind us about the perpetual journal, the aspect of the perpetual journal, and how you can actually make a note in spring, make a note in fall. You're making a note about the same exact plant, but different times of the year. And that will be information that you might really appreciate further down the line so that you know a little bit more about the life cycle of the particular plant, or you have the information that might encourage some further action. I know in some cases there are biannual weeds. So you might be like, wait a minute, this definitely was not here last summer. And then you'll get to reintroduce that and get to explore a whole new plant. So the perpetual journal is a fantastic format for your botanical journal, and I hope that's new to you. So in conclusion, I will remind us to keep it simple, that you don't need to have every tool at your disposal. You can use just a ballpoint pen or a pencil, paper. You don't even need to have a fancy journal. You can have a notebook, anything. You can have a piece of paper that you have folded and created a journal out of just a piece of paper that's been folded. I hope you've learned that you can learn so much by just continually uncovering aspects of a plant that you did not know were important previously, but that you learned that they might be helpful in identifying it. It's a certain pattern, the way the leaves are structured and the way the roots are, and so on and so forth. And the other thing is to stay curious. Keeping your mindset in a curious pattern is good for your health. You're growing your nervous system, you are evolving, and being in a growth mindset is fantastic. And also, hopefully, you'll encourage other people to do the same. And then, of course, it goes without saying, getting outside is so important for your health and other benefits, but also through observing, you have an appreciation, and you might even have a helpful conversation with your neighbor, which the armor, the massive, I would say Winnebago size armor honeysuckle is down. And my neighbor is probably healthier because of it, because he's been out there discovering that he had a whole portion of his property that he never knew existed with wonderful plantings in that area. So now I'd love to open up to questions,
Thanks,
the
Mary.
final section.
Yep. So there are no questions in the chat at the moment. There's been a lot of back and forth with folks who are, I think, are very exciting to go shopping for some art supplies to get going on this. So I think you've really inspired some people to think about getting out there and doing some botanical journaling. So thank you so much for this presentation. I learned a lot, and I will just also say this is the most beautiful presentation I've ever been a part of here at MGNV. All of your drawings are just fantastic. So thank you for presenting this.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's always a treat to work with fellow master gardeners and enthusiasts, and especially show the art side of what I'm passionate, and it's, 35 years leading art, making art. It's been a joy to me, but I do absolutely love teaching. So hopefully you've left with something, and your wallets will not be burdened too much by your new fascination with the materials. Remember, keep it simple. Getting outside is the most important part. And the resources do have some wonderful online opportunities for you to tap into and to link in, and don't hesitate to email me if you have further questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Mary. And thank you for putting this final slide up for us. Just want to say thanks everybody for attending today's conversation about botanical journaling. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay dry out there. Thanks again.